By 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing. From the bomb-blasted ruins of Berlin to the snow-cloaked forests of Bavaria, chaos reigned. But beneath the flames and rubble, the Nazi regime was executing one final mission, a plan not of battle, but of vanishing wealth. For 6 years, Hitler's war machine had looted the riches of Europe, gold bullion from national reserves, stolen heirlooms, private fortunes of murdered Jews, sacred relics, and masterpieces torn from museums. It all flowed into the belly of the Reichsbank, the iron heart of Nazi finance. By war's end, its vaults held a fortune, over $5 billion in gold alone, by modern estimates. But Hitler knew the war was lost. As Allied forces closed in on Berlin, he ordered an operation so secret, only a handful of men would ever know its full extent. Evacuate the Reichsbank gold. Burn the records. Hide everything. The plan was codenamed Action Feuergold. At its center was a mysterious, one-page coded document, an encrypted directive handwritten in the red pencil and passed from Himmler to trusted SS courier Erich Kranz. That document was supposed to reach Obersalzberg for safekeeping. Instead, it vanished. Witnesses last saw Kranz boarding a military convoy headed west. His body would later be found in a burned-out staff car outside Magdeburg. But the document was gone. And so was the gold. On the night of March 28, 1945, as Soviet shells rained on the outskirts of Berlin, a heavily guarded train departed from the Friedrichstrasse rail station. It carried no civilians, no troops, only a small crew of loyal SS men and dozens of locked, unmarked crates. They said it was heading for Munich. It never arrived. All official records of the train's cargo and route were destroyed in the Reich Chancellery's final days. Allied intelligence later recovered a fragment of a telegraph intercepted by the British. Cargo secure, proceeding to Point Steinlicht. Orders confirmed by Bormann. No location named Steinlicht was ever found on any map. The gold train, and its guardians, disappeared without a trace. And thus began the greatest treasure hunt in modern history, fueled by rumor, greed, and the chilling possibility that someone, somewhere, had pulled off the perfect crime as the world looked the other way. As Berlin crumbled and the Third Reich convulsed in its death throes, the war moved south, toward the ancient jagged spine of the Bavarian Alps. There, amid snow-capped peaks and forgotten fortresses, rumors stirred of a final Nazi stronghold, a mythical cache hidden in the mountains. A vault of gold, art, and secrets too dangerous to surface. Allied spies, working through the OSS and British MI6, began intercepting fragmented chatter. Encrypted transmissions referenced Operation Steiner, Vault Integrity, and the cryptic term Edelstein, German for precious stone, but perhaps a code name. The signals all traced back to southern Bavaria, near the salt mines and remote hamlets loyal to the Reich. And then came the defection. On April 23, 1945, an SS logistics officer, Obersturmbannführer Karl-Heinz Bühler, deserted his post at Berchtesgaden, Hitler's mountain retreat. Disheveled, wounded, and half-frozen, he turned up days later at a Swiss border village, begging for asylum. But Bühler brought more than desperation. He claimed to have memorized the location of a secret alpine deposit, a hidden chamber filled with Nazi gold. He told Allied interrogators that near the village of Hintersee, beneath the ruins of an abandoned salt processing facility, lay a system of tunnels and chambers built out under wartime cover. He had helped load crates onto trucks bound for this site. Crates, he swore, contained Reichsbank bullion, confiscated art, and personal chests belonging to Nazi high command. But there were no maps. Bühler said everything was kept off paper to protect the operation. Still, he remembered every turn, every code, every locking mechanism. He never got the chance to prove it. A week later, Bühler was found dead in a brothel on the outskirts of Salzburg, throat slashed, wrists bound, and his fingernails pried off. It was staged to look like a suicide. But the Americans weren't buying it. The madam, trembling, told Allied investigators that Bühler had checked in with a single suitcase and had paid in gold, not German marks. British sovereigns, gleaming and well-preserved. Gold that should not have existed in Nazi hands. His last recorded words to her: "They took it, but not for Germany." At the same time, villagers near Berchtesgaden reported seeing military trucks winding into the forests and never coming back down. Some claimed they saw crates unloaded into a blasted mountainside. Others, frightened into silence, later fled or vanished. Meanwhile, Allied forces finally arrived and seized the Berghof, Hitler's mountaintop residence. But by then, the caches were gone, and the roads into the high mountains had been sealed with dynamite. The legend of the Alpine Vault was born, and with it, a haunting possibility. The gold hadn't disappeared. It had been buried alive. With the war officially over, victory parades filled the streets of London, Paris, and New York. The swastika had fallen. The world rejoiced. But behind closed doors, the victors faced an unsettling truth. Vast sums of Nazi wealth were missing. To hunt it down, the Allies launched a coordinated operation, Operation Safe Haven, an ambitious mission to track, freeze, and reclaim stolen Nazi assets before they could be hidden in neutral nations or resurrected in shadow economies. On paper, Safe Haven was a global dragnet targeting banks in Switzerland, Portugal, Sweden, Argentina, anywhere Nazi gold could have been smuggled. Intelligence units were given sweeping access to records. Special task forces were formed to interrogate captured officers, trace gold shipments, and raid known Nazi safe houses. But almost from the start, something felt wrong. Reports were lost. Leads were ignored. Known Nazi collaborators were quietly released. The trail of stolen gold, instead of narrowing, scattered in every direction, like someone inside the system was deliberately scattering breadcrumbs into a storm. Enter Captain Daniel Hawthorne, a 29-year-old OSS analyst stationed in Frankfurt. Quiet, brilliant, and driven by a personal vendetta, his uncle had died in Dachau. Hawthorne was assigned to a sub-unit of Operation Safe Haven, tasked with tracing gold moved through the Reichsbank's southern branches. What he found chilled him. Through intercepted telegrams, decrypted SS memos, and quietly bribed Swiss bankers, Hawthorne began piecing together an unauthorized smuggling ring. According to his findings, not only had American military convoys been used to transport Nazi gold, but the crates had been diverted, not to official Allied depots, but to unmarked warehouses in France and Italy. Some of those crates never reached any records at all. At first, his reports were ignored, then redacted, then buried. But Hawthorne didn't stop. He documented everything in a dossier codenamed Icarus. In May of 1946, convinced he was being followed, he compiled the most damning evidence, including a names list and a series of photographs showing American soldiers unloading gold bars from Nazi-marked trucks into unmarked containers. 2 days later, Captain Hawthorne was found dead in a Munich boarding house. Official cause: barbiturate overdose. The report was signed and sealed within hours. But the locals said there had been no pills, no struggle, just a man who didn't wake up, and 2 American MPs who showed up unannounced at dawn. But Hawthorne wasn't reckless. Before he died, he mailed a package, tightly wrapped, addressed to a modest home in Providence, Rhode Island. The recipient? Claire Hawthorne, his wife. Weeks after the funeral, Claire, still in mourning, received the envelope. She hesitated. She knew her husband had secrets, but she hadn't expected this. Inside were burned-edge papers and a single black-and-white photograph. It showed a military airfield at dusk, the silhouettes of U.S. soldiers moving crates onto a truck with no insignia. And under a magnifying glass, barely visible in the grainy corner of the image, a gold bar marked with the Nazi eagle. Claire stared at it for hours. Her husband had died for this. Now the secret was hers. The war had ended, but in the forests of Lower Silesia, the echoes of Nazi secrets still whispered through the pines. Local villagers near Waubzig, a sleepy town nestled among the Owl Mountains, had passed down a strange story of a Nazi train, heavily armored, glinting under moonlight, seen entering a tunnel near Xiaz Castle, and never coming out. It was no ordinary train. They said it was guarded by SS soldiers in black uniforms who sealed the entrance behind them with explosives. Then they vanished. No one dared go near. Anyone who did disappeared. For years it was dismissed as myth. But the tale lingered, part of regional folklore, like a ghost story parents used to hush their children. Until the 1960s. With the Cold War in full swing, Soviet intelligence units began conducting secret excavations in the region. Polish miners reported being conscripted into forced labor beneath the old hillsides. Their job: clear tunnels and bore through bedrock in what they were told were geological studies. But the truth was far more ominous. Some of the older workers spoke of sealed steel doors, of vaults rigged with explosives, and the scent of rotting corpses behind welded bulkheads. And then came the divers. A privately funded expedition, Cold War opportunists with money, maps, and a taste for danger, arrived in 1964. Their target: a long-abandoned coal shaft known as Reese Project 17 near the Owl Mountains. They believed it was connected to Project Reese, the massive underground Nazi complex whose true purpose remains unknown to this day. On their third descent, the divers found something, but fled in a panic, refusing to speak of what they'd seen. One later told a journalist, shaking, they weren't buried. They were entombed, and still watching. The shaft was sealed again. But the real breakthrough came in 1981 from an unlikely source. Dr. Marek Jaskolski, a Polish historian and archivist with a fixation on Nazi logistics. Digging through Soviet-era archives in Wrocław, he found a classified Red Army report, translated from German and stamped confidential, level 5. It referenced Armored Train 43Z, last seen departing Breslau in April 1945. Its cargo manifest, though partially redacted, included the words art crates, 43 units, monetary reserves, destination deferred, Reichsbank priority seal issued by Bormann. But the most chilling line? Tunnel sealed under direct Soviet order. Do not excavate. Lethal trap suspected. Dr. Jaskolski knew what it meant. The tunnel had not collapsed. It had been intentionally buried. Not to protect what was inside, but to hide it forever. As he prepared to go public, Jaskolski received anonymous threats. His tires were slashed. His home was broken into, but nothing stolen, except one item: the microfilm copy of the Soviet file. Still, he had already made a second copy, and the coordinates scribbled in the margin pointed to a ridge near Siaz Castle. Was the legend of the Nazi gold train real? And if so, who sealed it? The Soviets? Or someone far more dangerous? High in the Austrian Alps, wrapped in mist and pine, lies a deceptively tranquil body of water. Lake Toplitz. Remote, ice-cold, and plunging to unnatural depths, it's long been the subject of rumor, whispered among locals, feared by divers. The Nazis, it was said, used the lake as a dumping ground during the war. Not for bodies, for secrets. By 1945, as Allied forces swept through Austria, the SS grew desperate to erase evidence, not just of stolen wealth, but of the economic weapons they'd created: forged currencies, fake passports, and the machinery of financial sabotage. In the final weeks, crates were seen being hauled up winding trails by overworked laborers, some barely more than children. They were marched into the woods, past signs reading "Verboten," and then vanished. The locals said they heard splashing in the dead of night, followed by gunshots. Then silence. Years later, in the 1950s and 60s, interest in Lake Toplitz surged. Rumors of Nazi treasure drew adventurers, journalists, and government-backed expeditions alike. But the lake was cursed. The water is nearly black beyond 20 meters, thick with layers of decaying vegetation. Visibility drops to zero. Worse, the lake floor is a chaotic mess of fallen logs, waterlogged giants that shift with currents, pinning divers in place. One diver described it as descending into a cold, living graveyard. Several never returned. In 1959, a joint expedition by West German and Austrian investigators made a breakthrough. They retrieved waterproof crates tangled in the submerged timber. Inside, millions of counterfeit British pounds, perfect replicas, created under Operation Bernhard, The Nazi plan to destabilize the British economy. But there were more crates below, heavier ones, sealed with metal bands. In 1963, another diving team returned with a cable winch and risked pulling up a massive safe. It cracked open in the snowy moonlight. Inside were gold bars, not stamped with the Reich's eagle, but with a different seal entirely. Schweizerische Nationalbank, the Swiss National Bank. The implications were staggering. Was this Nazi gold being laundered through Switzerland? Or was Switzerland merely the last stop in a long chain of covert deals? And why had it been dumped, not hidden? Shortly after the discovery, one of the lead divers, Klaus Gerber, was found dead in his apartment. Cause of death: carbon monoxide poisoning. Officially ruled an accident. His partner vanished 6 months later while hiking near the lake. Only his boots were found. Then came a leak. A retired intelligence agent claimed that Lake Toplitz had been marked off-limits by NATO intelligence. Not for safety, for secrecy. Whatever lay at the bottom wasn't just treasure. It was evidence, documents, lists, orders, and perhaps a vault of gold that someone didn't want surfaced. As one survivor put it, gold sinks, but secrets drown. The Third Reich had fallen, but its shadows spread far beyond the ashes of Berlin. In the years following 1945, Nazis did not simply disappear. Many slipped through the cracks of justice, vanishing across borders with new names, forged papers, and money, a lot of money. Behind their escape was a name whispered like a ghost through Allied interrogation rooms and Vatican corridors. ODESSA, Organisation der ehemaligen SS-Angehörigen. Officially, it never existed. But intelligence files recovered decades later suggest otherwise. It was a covert network, part smuggling ring, part underground railroad, that moved high-ranking Nazi officers from Europe to safety in Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Egypt, and even North America. And it was fueled by something far more tangible than ideology: gold. In 1947, a Swiss banking clerk, under anonymous protection, reported suspicious transactions linked to war survivors, transferring funds from unnumbered accounts to South American banks. His superiors dismissed it. Weeks later, he was killed in a staged cycling accident outside Zurich. But one clue survived: a transaction receipt bearing the name Wilhelm Keitel, a Nazi general who had supposedly been executed in 1946. The trail went cold, until 1972 in the port city of Genoa, Italy. A faded photograph taken by a Dutch journalist during a dock strike showed an old man boarding a freighter bound for South America. The name on the manifest, Victor Strauss, an alleged textile merchant from Graz. But facial recognition software decades later would reveal the truth. It was Dr. Friedrich Kerner, the Nazi banker who had overseen gold transfers out of the Reichsbank during the final days of the war. He had vanished without a trace in 1945. The same man would appear again in 1991, photographed in São Paulo, now head of a major export firm, still under the name Victor Strauss. By then, he was untouchable, protected by wealth, decades of legal fog, and powerful friends. But he had made one mistake. In 1989, a Brazilian financial regulator flagged a dormant account at Banco de Ouro. It had not been touched since 1946. The account contained gold bars, untouched and unclaimed, until one was quietly removed for testing. The serial number was damning. It matched a bar listed in the 1944 Reichsbank inventory, reported missing from the Berlin evacuation manifest. The vault's keyholder? A shell company traced back to Strauss's export firm. A journalist named Helena Nobre, chasing the ODESSA story, cornered Strauss outside a gala in Rio de Janeiro. She asked him point blank, "Is it true you smuggled Nazi gold to South America?" He smiled, adjusted his cufflinks, and said, "I didn't smuggle anything. I delivered what was already paid for." 3 weeks later, Helena's apartment was ransacked. Her notes were stolen. She fled to Uruguay. But she had already mailed copies of the bar's serial records and shipping receipts to a European newspaper, which published them under the headline, "The Gold That Bought Freedom." The public was stunned. But government said nothing. No charges were filed. No investigations followed. Because behind the ODESSA network were not just Nazis in exile. There were banks, politicians, intelligence agencies, and deals made in the name of stability. By the early 1950s, as the Iron Curtain descended across Europe, a new war was already underway, one fought in shadows, proxy states, and dossiers marked eyes only. In this new world, yesterday's enemies became today's assets, and some of the worst crimes of World War II were quietly rewritten or erased. And beneath it all, the gold kept moving. In 2004, a Freedom of Information Act request led to the release of over 4,000 pages of declassified U.S. intelligence files, redacted, fragmented, but damning. Tucked within the pages of the CIA's wartime archives were references to a program known only by its cryptonym, Project Eclipse. The files outlined a series of covert post-war missions by American intelligence to recover and control high-value Nazi assets, not just gold, but art, documents, technology, and above all, people. Among them were senior SS officers, engineers, and financial operatives with intimate knowledge of the Reich's hidden caches. One such man, Sturmbannführer Oskar Dietrich, formerly of the SS Economic Administration, thought to be dead. In fact, he had been extracted from Austria in 1946 under American protection. The deal was simple. In exchange for his cooperation, Dietrich offered the location of several gold transfer sites, names of Swiss intermediaries, and intelligence on Soviet movements in post-war Europe. He also handed over a leather ledger marked Eisen Reserve A. It listed names, serial numbers, transport routes, and payouts. But the most shocking part of the Eclipse files wasn't that deals were made with war criminals. It was who approved them. A memo dated November 3, 1946, stamped Eyes Only, bore the signature of a senior White House advisor, authorizing the partial retention of recovered Nazi gold to fund strategic intelligence development. Another memo, heavily redacted, references gold recovered from an unregistered Alpine location, later stored in Fort Knox under emergency classification. No documentation ever surfaced in official Treasury records. Publicly, Operation Safe Haven continued, chasing Nazi assets across Europe. But behind the scenes, intelligence agencies were picking through the treasure, deciding what would be returned and what would become collateral. In one chilling exchange, a CIA officer stationed in Munich wrote, "Our understanding with Dietrich remains stable. He has delivered value. The assets are best kept under controlled circumstances until political stability returns. Truth is not yet in the interest of peace." And then came the photo. One of the last documents in the Eclipse file was a blurry surveillance image taken in Lisbon, 1948. It showed a small cafe. Seated at a corner table were three men, one in an American officer's coat, one in a civilian suit, and one with an unmistakable face. Martin Bormann, Hitler's private secretary, officially declared dead. The back of the photo bore a handwritten note. Asset confirmed. Eclipse protocols maintained. Deal secured. By the time the CIA files were released, nearly all involved were dead. The official response was silence. But historians, investigative journalists, and truth seekers knew what it meant. The Reich hadn't simply been defeated. Parts of it had been quietly absorbed. And for the right price, in gold, in knowledge, in silence, its secrets were bought, not exposed. Cliffhanger. The final memo in the file reads, "Authorization granted. Langley, January 5, 1950. The signature is blacked out. But someone, at the highest level, had made the call. It was supposed to be a routine hunting trip in the quiet woods of Berchtesgaden, Bavaria, a place once home to Hitler's mountain retreat. The year was 1994, and the hunter, Hans Leitner, knew these hills like the back of his hand, until his dog vanished down a slope and didn't return. Calling out and following the sound of barking, Hans stumbled upon what looked like an old stone outcropping, almost swallowed by time and forest. The ground beneath was soft. Strange. He kicked away leaves and soil, revealing a half-buried steel door, welded shut, seams rusted. Within hours, local authorities were called. By morning, a demolition team had arrived. What they uncovered would shock the German government and set off a global chain of silence. Behind the sealed entrance was a narrow tunnel, bricked up halfway down. Once broken open, the passage led to a bunker carved into the mountain, cold and silent, untouched since the final days of 1945. Inside, rows of rusted steel crates, marked with a Reichsadler eagle. Stacks of documents disintegrating in damp air. Personal effects, military coats, helmets, and gas masks. And in the far chamber, bones. 3 skeletons slumped in different corners. All male. All wearing remnants of German military uniforms. One had a Luger pistol still in hand. Another had a crushed skull. The third was missing his jaw. But one thing survived. A metal dental plate embedded in the skull of the man near the crates. DNA and forensic testing would later confirm the impossible. The body belonged to Oberst Heinrich Müller, a senior logistics officer in the SS who had vanished without a trace in May 1945. His name had surfaced in Allied interrogation reports as someone with key knowledge of Reichsbank asset transfers. But no one had ever found him. Until now. And he had taken something to the grave. Hidden inside one of his molars, sealed behind the dental plate, was a microfilm capsule, no larger than a grain of rice. When developed, it revealed a list of 84 names, all SS or Nazi Party logistics and finance officers. Locations and bank account numbers, many still active into the 1960s. A ciphered document titled Erbschaft Wolf, the Wolf's Inheritance. But the most explosive revelation? One of the names matched a man believed to have died at Nuremberg, and another matched a living European industrialist with direct ties to a Swiss multinational bank. Word of the discovery leaked to a Berlin journalist who published a brief article before vanishing without a trace. His editor dismissed it as paranoia. His apartment was ransacked. His notes gone. The official line from German authorities? A forgotten wartime storage facility. No valuables recovered. Remains respectfully buried. But years later, a whistleblower inside the Bundesarchiv claimed the truth was far more disturbing. Not only were several of the crates removed under military escort, but the gold they contained bore markings not of the Reich, but of 3 post-war banks in Zurich and Geneva. And the microfilm? Classified, never acknowledged. Sealed under national security protocols. An anonymous informant sends a photo to an independent historian. It shows a high-level banking conference in Basel, dated 1964. In the front row, smiling, is the same man whose name was on Müller's microfilm, now an aging executive, shaking hands with American and European officials. He was buried in that bunker in 1945, or so they said. By the late 1990s, the pieces were finally starting to connect. Not just rumors or archival curiosities, but cold, tangible clues tying missing Nazi gold to post-war global finance. But for those who chased the truth too closely, the cost was rising. Journalists, historians, even former intelligence officers, anyone who got too close to uncovering the scale of the theft, began to suffer strange accidents, sudden heart attacks, vanishing acts. Most were written off as coincidence. But in the shadows, a pattern was forming. Among the most vocal was Clara Weiss, a Berlin-based attorney specializing in restitution cases for Holocaust survivors and families of looted victims. She had been working for over a decade to trace wartime transfers that led to Swiss and Argentine banks. But in 2001, her research took a dangerous turn. Using a copy of the Müller microfilm smuggled to her by a whistleblower inside the Bundesarchiv, Clara discovered a parallel list. Account numbers, aliases, and transactions involving gold deposits as late as 1972, including one entry tied to a U.S. defense contractor. Soon, she began receiving threats. Her email was hacked. Her phones tapped. A man claiming to be a former BND officer warned her off the case. "You're not dealing with criminals, you're dealing with architects." Still, she pressed forward, planning to testify at an international restitution hearing in Geneva. But Clara Weiss never made it. On a rainy morning in March 2002, her car was found submerged in the Elbe River, an apparent accident. Her briefcase was missing, the glove box ripped open. Authorities ruled it an unfortunate misjudgment in fog. But her friends and colleagues weren't convinced. Her apartment had been stripped bare, but not by looters. It was surgical. Computers missing, files gone, even framed photos removed from the walls. Except for one thing. At the morgue, her cousin retrieved her personal effects. Hidden in the sole of her shoe was a folded scrap of water-damaged paper pressed into the lining like an emergency parachute. On it, just a few words. Langley, 1950, H. Gruber. They knew. We all knew. Investigators later traced the name Gruber to a minor post-war intelligence liaison, a German-American operative transferred to CIA authority in 1950. No photo, no record of death. One paycheck stub from 1952. But the trail didn't end there. Across Europe and South America, other names on the Miller list began dying. Old men, mostly, in nursing homes and private clinics. Strokes, suicides, sudden infections. One jumped from a hospital window. Another died in a house fire ruled electrical. Few left wills. None left interviews. Even among truth seekers, fear took root. A British gold hunter who'd spent years searching alpine lakes sold all his equipment and moved to an unnamed island. A Swiss banking auditor resigned abruptly after a break-in at his office and a warning left on his windshield. A gold coin, too pristine to be authentic, stamped with the Reichsadler. Some called it a curse, others called it a cover-up. But one aging journalist, who had once published a buried report on ODESSA, perhaps said it best. It's not that the gold is lost, it's that no one who finds it is allowed to speak. In a safe deposit box rented under Clara's name, long unopened until 2020, her family discovered a single envelope addressed to an unnamed recipient. Inside was a torn page from a ledger, and one word underlined in red ink, survived. The date next to it? 1950. The location? Langley. The implication? One of the masterminds was never prosecuted. In fact, he may have helped write the rules of the New World. It began with rumors, scattered documents, and whispered confessions. But it ends with a ledger, real, heavy, iron-bound, pulled from a Swiss vault in the winter of 2022 under a sealed subpoena from an international tribunal investigating war crimes and financial complicity. The ledger, weathered and scorched around the edges, had no title, no author, just a stamp on the inside cover, EH-47. Believed to refer to Eisenhower Headquarters, 1947. Inside were entries detailing gold transfers, not just in 1945, but decades beyond, 1954, 1961, 1978. Transfers between accounts tied to Swiss institutions, Vatican banks, Argentine firms, and American defense contractors. Withdrawals marked only by code names, Comet, Luce, Archangel, and beneath them, initials, some of which matched Allied officers, former Nazis, and disturbingly, post-war world leaders. One name appeared dozens of times, WM, matched against cross-referenced documents. Analysts identified him as Wilhelm Merton, a former SS economic officer officially executed in 1946, except now linked to NATO advisory meetings in the 1950s under a different identity. Another? EB, a prominent Swiss banker knighted by multiple Western governments. But the most shocking entry came near the end. 1973, final transfer. 24.6 tons to custodian, Atlantic Pacific Fund, authorized by The Circle. The Circle. A term that had only appeared in one other place, the microfilm hidden in Muller's tooth. It was believed to refer not to a place but a group, a cabal of wartime survivors, financiers, and covert operatives who had engineered a global laundering of the Reichsbank gold, not for personal gain, but to reshape the post-war world. And reshape it they did. The final investigation traced the Nazi gold to shell corporations that funded European reconstruction projects, South American land purchases used for intelligence bases, early capital in tech firms and arms manufacturers, even donations to political campaigns during the Cold War. In short, the gold was never lost. It was absorbed, laundered, and rebranded as the capital of modern Western infrastructure. The treasure of a genocidal empire helped build skyscrapers, fund think tanks, and backroom diplomacy. It had become invisible, no longer bars in a vault, but contracts, stocks, and power. A silent partner in history. But the revelations came at a cost. Key witnesses disappeared. Judges were pressured. The tribunal disbanded. No criminal charges were ever filed. Every nation involved claimed plausible deniability. And the ledger? It vanished again. Last seen in a briefcase leaving Geneva, aboard a private jet bound for Washington. A declassified intelligence memo, released under FOIA in 2024, reveals one final line scribbled in the margin of a 1950 CIA meeting transcript. They'll never find it all. That's the point. It's the seed, not the treasure. The speaker? An unidentified operative later promoted. His name redacted. But the meeting was attended by a young economic advisor who would go on to become Secretary of State, and eventually, CEO of a global banking conglomerate. History doesn't bury its secrets, it reinvests them.